Hello there everyone. In today's episode I'd like to talk about Cinema's take system. Takes is this tab up in the corner over here. Now essentially the take system is a way for you to make multiple versions of the same project. So a fairly typical example would be maybe you're making a perfume bottle and your client has said, hey, right, we want a pink version, an orange version, a blue version, and we want a small 50ml bottle, a larger 100ml, and maybe a 175 bottle. So you've sort of really got to make 6 different products. Now normally this would have required you to make either 6 projects or put all 6 things in the same file and try and sort of hide them and reveal them as needed. But the take system makes this general process much easier. So what I'm going to show you is how to use the takes, and then I'll show you sort of a couple more advanced little things which you can do. So first of all, how do we do the basics? Well, let's say I have a torus. Let's just pretend this is our product. If you come over to your takes, it's over on the side here. The first thing you want to know is how to do the basics. So the basics are just making different versions of the same thing. So let's say we want to do a thin torus and a thick one, 2 different sized donuts. What we have here is our main take. The main take is where you store all of the main basic information about the scene, and you then have sub-versions underneath where they have alterations. So to do the basics, click on this plus button, and this will make you a new take. So give this a name which is going to sort of mean something to you. So double click, and I'll name this one thin. And I'm going to click the add button once again. This version will be thick. So in order to adjust these and make our different versions, you first have to select which take you actually want to work on. Now please do keep in mind this is not as simple as clicking the name and making it highlight orange, unfortunately. What you've got to do is activate it. It's a bit like turning on a camera. If I had multiple cameras in a scene, just selecting the camera name doesn't make you look through the camera. You have to tick this little black and white box over to the side. Well, the take system is the same. Activate one of these takes by clicking that little box you see. So let's say we want to make a thin version of this object. Turn on the thin take, and we have a couple of choices at this point. In the same way that with recording, you can hit this record button or use these little recorder icons to the side, or you can just turn on auto record. Well, we have something pretty much exactly the same with takes. You can either specify a setting you want to change in this edition of the file, or you can turn on the automatic system, which just generally makes it a bit quicker and easier to work with. So let's assume we're going with the automatic mode first, because it's the most straightforward one. At the very top, we have this round orange icon. This is the auto take button. Basically, turn this thing on. Everything will turn blue. This is letting us know that any adjustments we make will actually be saved into the file. So for my thin edition of this object, I'm going to go to my object list. I'm going to go to my torus. And the thing I want to actually change on this is probably going to be the pipe radius. This is basically the thickness of the torus. So if I knock this down from say 500 to 200, there's our thin version. And that's it. It's done, it's saved, it's recorded. All I've got to do now is go to my takes, choose a different take, choose a different edition of the project file. Let's say go for the thick one. And I'll say, right, okay, in the thick version, this pipe radius should be 800. And in theory, that's it. If I go back to my main version, this was the original file. I've now got my thin edition and my thick edition. The beautiful thing about this though is that anything you do to the original object in the main take will flow through into the others. So for example, if I go back to my main version and I say, this ring should have been this large, and there should have been a material, and the material should have been blue, for example. You can do whatever you like, because in these sub-takes, all those changes will remain. So I have a thin, blue, large donut, and I now have a thick version. So that's the general sort of simplicity and beauty of the take system. You can just have lots and lots of different versions, all within one file. Now, let's take a look at the other options we have for making these takes. So this is the automatic mode, and it's the one I'd use probably most of the time. But if you're the kind of person who doesn't like automatic keyframing because you accidentally keep recording things you didn't mean to, you may not be a giant fan of this. So if you don't like that, turn it off, and you can just do these things manually. So let's say I go to my list of objects, have a look at the torus, and I want to change, let's say, how many polygons it uses for the size. Let me just check which take I'm on. Okay, so I'm on the thick take. You can just right click on any parameter and select override. Override basically tells this take, this version, you should be different. So click on there. It now sort of lights up, it's available for change, and I can type in anything I like. So maybe I'll go for 4, do a super low poly version, and that will have been saved into the take. So my main version is nice and smooth with all those polygons. So is the thin version, because we didn't change that. But my thick one, that's now low poly. You can see the things you've changed over to the side. If you unfold this, it will start showing you which parameters, which settings you've changed and what the actual value is, so you can see what's going on. And usefully, if you decide, oh wait, I didn't actually want to change how many segments, how many polygons this object had, you are free to delete these. Just click on the thing, hit delete, and it will now get rid of that particular setting. Okay, so those are your two main options for actually making the takes in the first place. Let's look at something a little bit more powerful though. So yes, we've got these takes, but you can also do child takes. So I mentioned before with the perfume bottles, maybe we have 3 different colours and we have 3 different sizes. Well, I don't necessarily just want to make sort of 6 or 9 different takes. It'd be nice if I could sort of make a child take, a sub take. Well, we can. Just choose one of these takes, right click, and say new child take. A child take is going to have sort of a sub selection of things. So maybe I could have within this thin version, I could have one which is red. Let's add another one. One which is green. And one more, another child take. We'll go one which is yellow. Okay, well, I'm going to go back to my automatic mode. And I'm going to say, look, yellow one, material should be yellow. For the green one, it should be green. And for the red one, yep, you guessed it, it should be red. But that's it. It's done. Everything I've done has just been recorded. So I toggle through these. I have my yellow version, my green one, my red one, or I can go back to sort of like the main parent and it sort of reverts back to that blue colour I had. So there you go, that's sort of the basic gist of this. Just a bit of advice as far as materials go. If you're just tweaking a colour, what I've just done here is fine. You can take your one material and adjust some of its settings. But what if you want fundamentally different materials? What if I want to have a gold bottle and a see-through plastic bottle and maybe a cardboard bottle? Maybe I do. You don't necessarily want to change all those settings within one material because maybe you've already got these 3 materials already made. Well, keep in mind you can change sort of links to materials as well. So let's go for this thick one. Maybe I have my sort of my plastic. Let me go back to my main take for a moment. So ideally you set these things up in your main version and then you apply them in the take. Otherwise these things would only exist in the sub take and I wouldn't be able to get back to them from the main version. Trust me, when you're making things, go back to your main take. It helps quite a bit. But in this main take, I'll say, look, I'll have one plastic material. I'll have another, which is going to be wood, and I'm going to be super lazy. I wouldn't actually use this in real life generally, but let's add the super quick wood shader. And one more, new material, let's make a glass. Or if you're Northern English, glass. Let's add a glass material. So, transparency. Choose a glass preset. So there's my three materials. What you can do as an alternative, so I'll do this on the thick version, is I'll make those child takes again. 1, 2, 3. And we have plastic, we'll have wood, and we'll have glass. You can just change the links. So on my glass version, when I choose my torus, or at least rather when I select the material which is applied, the material it uses is a link. It's literally the very first setting. It's not something you tend to change much yourself manually, but it's there. So I can drag this, which one was I changing? Glass. Okay, so I can just drag this glass material over there so it replaces it. You could also drop it on top of the existing tag, that would also work. So there's my glass one. And for my wood, I'll drag on the wood material. So there you go, there's my sort of three versions, plastic, wood and glass. Now just a word of warning, because this is something which I've seen people do before and I understand why, but don't. What you mustn't do when you're making a take is make something new. What I mean with that is, let's pretend for a moment that I didn't drag those materials onto the existing tag. Let me just undo those adjustments. Okay, so let's say I'm trying to adjust my wood version, my wood take. What you mustn't do is drag this wood material onto the object. Because when you do this, have a look over here. Right now I have one blue plastic material applied. If I drag this wood onto the object, I now have a new material. I haven't changed what's there, which is really all takes does. It tweaks what's already there. I've created a new item. And the problem is you can't have something which exists in a subtake but not in the parent. So when I've dragged this wood on, what I've also done is I have actually also added it to the main take. It still exists in there as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, don't try and make anything new, just adjust what's already there. That is your sort of safe bet for working with the take system. Okay, so let's see. So that's the main take. Other areas, other things you might want to know about. There are a couple of different views. This is the dual tree view where you can see all your takes and you can see all the settings which you've applied. To be brutally honest, this is pretty much the view you're going to want to use all the time. The other two modes just let you see essentially the left-hand side column or the right-hand side column. I don't see much massive use for seeing just one side or the other. You really kind of do need to see both to work with this effectively. You know, if you do need a bit more space, by all means rip this menu off, undock it, or dock it in somewhere else larger, or throw it on a second screen. I understand this area here might be a little bit claustrophobic, but you know what, it actually does kind of work for the most part. Okay, so that's that part. Another thing you can do is override cameras and render settings. Maybe when I render the glass version, I want a slightly different camera view because the glass only works from a certain position as far as the camera is concerned. Or maybe when I'm doing the wood one, all that wood grain needs some higher quality render settings. Well, if you like, you can click either of these sort of ghostly icons and choose different cameras and render settings. So if I happen to have a few cameras in here, and in my render settings, if I happened to have a few different render options, which I'd sort of set up previously, in your take system, you can tell any particular take, hey look, you use this camera here, and you use this particular render setting. So you can also override these per take. So you could actually use takes for having a quick, rough default test render, or you could use a take for setting up a high quality setting. So it doesn't just have to be for when the objects change. You could use the take system for switching cameras, switching render settings. It's quite versatile in that way. Now, what about this other icon, this sort of circle here? It's not the best icon. It looks a bit like a record dots, or maybe the solo button, which you've seen elsewhere. It's neither of those. It is a checkbox. The checkbox is for you to quickly render specified takes. So let's say I want to render out plastic, wood and glass, and also the green version. I don't want to sit there queuing these up one by one, or rendering them off one by one. So what you can do is make use of these render icons at the top. These first two are just sort of standard renders. So this first icon says, look, just render every single take, one after another, into my picture viewer. The second one is pretty much the exact same thing, but it now only does the marked takes. In other words, the ones I've enabled here, so you can specify them. To the side, there's two more icons, and these are really the same thing, except these are for team render. So team render everything, or team render just the marked things. But there is actually a third way of rendering, and to be honest, this is actually my preferred way of doing it. The problem with rendering all this stuff to the picture viewer is Cinema just launches one render after another. You don't get to see them in a list, you don't get to reorder it, you can't sort of check it off before you hit render. It just queues them up and off it goes, but you can't see the queue anywhere. And it's a bit annoying. So there is actually another way of doing this. If you come over to your render menu and you look at your render queue, in here we do have, under File, Add Project with Takes. So these first two icons, sort of all takes and marked takes, there is another version of this in your render queue. So I can add everything into my queue in the scene, or I can add everything I have marked in my scene to the queue. So these are actually probably the more useful render buttons for you, because it's nice to see things in a queue, check they're right, check the file names before you actually commit and hit that render button. Okay, so that's the rendering out the way. What else have I missed? Well, there's this icon here. Now, this is something called override groups, and I will just preface this and say this is not the most useful thing you will ever find. I'm going to mention it just for completeness, but I've never personally had a need for it. I see why it exists, but it's not something you need too often. Override groups, it allows you to just sort of mass change certain specific tags without having to change them all individually. So let me just get a new scene without all this stuff in here. And let's just throw something else in here. So let's say I've just got a few objects, a few of those, and maybe I've got a pink material and a yellow material. One there, and actually one more, because I just want to show you what happens when you have a certain specific situation. Okay, so I've got three cubes, one with no materials, one with a pink material, and one with two materials applied with a selection tag. Now, override groups, so let me just first of all make a take. Okay, override groups, if I add one, what it does is it gives you this section over here, which if you unfold it, you'll see it says new group. There's nothing really in here except for this plus mark, and this is the key important bit, and sod's law, of course, that's going to go slightly out of screen, so I'll throw up a screenshot for you and move it over a bit. There you go. Okay, so in here you can choose specific tags. So this list, it's just a list of tags, texture tags, compositing tags, display tags, things you would normally find by looking under this tags menu, but specifically just 8 of them. Again, they're not massively useful, but the most useful one really is the texture tag. The texture tag allows you to quickly mass apply a certain material to certain objects. So let's say I have a fourth material. This one, oops, let's go back to our main take. That's where you should always add things and edit them. Let's say this fourth material is going to be bright, solid red. In my takes, on this take here, I'm going to tell the override group that it should override something. It should sort of overpower whatever else is there. And the thing I'm going to overpower is going to be a texture. So what you'll see is this little question mark, because it doesn't know which material it should be using or applying. So you drag and drop your new material onto there, and that's basically assigned it. So what happens is, any object I place into this group will have all of its materials overpowered. So I'm just going to undock this because it's a bit annoying bouncing back and forth between these two tabs. So let me just undock my takes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is say, look, this this object here, cube number 2, this has no materials. But if I drag and drop this into the override group, it will suddenly have a red material applied. You can see the material there, and it's got a little T on there to show it's the take system. But this material, it doesn't sort of properly exist. It's not permanently there. If I go back to my main take, you can see it disappears and I'm just left with this blank object. So it's just a sort of temporary take material. It only exists for this take here. But you can put anything you like in here. If I put my pink cube in there with one material, drag and drop, chuck it in. Oops, missed. Put that there. You can see that my pink material has now suddenly turned red. And the same thing will happen with objects with multiple materials. If I put this sort of a 2-coloured cube, number 1, in there, missed, both of its materials have turned red. So this override group will completely overpower all tags of a certain type with something. So if I go back to the main take, you can see, they all revert back. But on this take, they've all been overpowered and been told to turn red. Now, you could have largely done this by just turning on the take system and then put that red material onto all of those materials. You know, it would have worked. And to be brutally honest, it wouldn't have been massively different from what's already here. But it is just a slightly different way of doing things. I guess if you've got a big hierarchy where you've just textured up like something at the top of the hierarchy. So let me give an example where it might actually be useful. So let's say I've got this group, this null, and in there we've got cubes and we've got toruses. Is that the right word? Tori? Toruses? And we've got a sphere, and they're all grouped up. Because this is a big old hierarchy, I've created this nice reflective golden material. There we go. So I've got this nice gold material sat on the group, but I just want a certain specific object in here to be different. And for whatever reason, I don't want to give it a material. Well, that's where the override group would come in use. You can add a take, turn on the override group and say, look, you should have a texture override, and the texture override is going to turn, back to the main take so you can actually edit it. The texture override turns everything red. I could tell a certain object, even though it doesn't have a material, I could say, hey, look, Mr. Torus, you should be part of this red group. And there you go. You can overpower it, temporarily add a material, and that's what the override group system does. So again, these are the options you've got. You can do it with display tags, compositing tags. So the first two are probably the most useful ones, compositing tags and texture tags. The rest of them, it's probably pretty rare you're actually going to use these, but they're there if you want them. Right. One of the last things to mention then is the mysteriously awfully named lock overrides button. Now, this has got to be the most badly named setting the software has. And I'm sure I've probably said that once or twice before already, but I promise you this time, this is the most badly named setting Cinema has. What does lock overrides do? It has nothing to do with locking, and it has nothing to do with overrides. Thanks for that one. What lock overrides does is it allows you to edit the main take whilst looking at a sub-take. So let me give you an analogy for a moment. Sometimes, let's say I've got a light source and I've got a cube with some rounded edges. Sometimes you want to edit one object whilst looking at the settings of another. So maybe I'm trying to work out how to get the best highlight on the edge of this cube here. So I'm going to need to move this light, but I'm going to need to maybe change the settings of the cube. Well, what we traditionally do is go to the cube, lock the display with this little padlock, and I can now freely select the light and move it around, but I can still see my cube settings. I'm not looking at the light, I'm looking at my cube. So I can fiddle around with the settings, and great, brilliant. I can sort of do two different things at once. And really that's what lock overrides is. So let me show you. So if I have an object and I have a take, and I've got auto take turned on because I'm editing something within this take here. Maybe let's say I've told it to be squished this way. Right. What if I want to change the height of this cube whilst looking at a take? But I want to change that height for all takes. So ultimately what I want to do is I want to go back to my main take and change the height and then see how it looks in my sub take. But the problem is I want to look at the sub take. I want to see this thin version whilst changing the height. And the problem is if I change the height here, it's only going to change it on this take. That's what lock overrides is for. It allows you to look at a specific take, turn this thing off, it's on by default, and now what happens, so long as this thing is disabled, lock overrides, all my changes won't be applied to this take, they'll actually be applied to the main take. So I am free to change the height. That won't have just changed it here, that will have also have changed it, fingers crossed, in the main take. So that's all it is. Lock overrides means only affect the main take. So hopefully you can see why it's the most badly named setting ever, because, well, I certainly didn't know what it did till I started asking about it, and I don't think most other people did either. Anyway, we're kind of almost done on this, really. The only other little teeny tiny thing to mention is just the fact that once you've got these different takes and all these different versions, if you need to for any reason, perhaps sending it off to a render farm or giving the file to another person, you can have a take and then save it out as a file. Just go File, Current Take to New Document, and there you go. You can save it out as its own separate file for some reason. Anyway, there you go. That's the take system. I hope that's been useful. I hope that's filled in any questions. If you do have any questions about the take system, feel free to answer them, ask them down below, and I'll see if I can answer them as soon as possible. And as ever, if you have any questions, drop me an email. Contact@3dfluff.com. We'll get it through to me, and I'll see if I can make you a video. Okay, this has been Mash from 3D Fluff. Cheers for now.